Thanks, Sebastian. I'm going to I'm just going to pretend I heard so many applause. There's so much applause right there. I'm really happy to be here. One of the reasons why I pursued the education I did was to really help from a mental health side for athletes specifically. But really, along the way, I just have accumulated a lot of information that I love to share. And so when I was reached out about this, it seemed like a really great opportunity to share some aspects of the sports psychology education that I received, but also things that I learned in my doctorate for school psychology that are specific to resilience. And so one thing I can say is that all those elements really play well together. So my name is Dr. Polo DeCano. I use he, him, his, we, me pronouns. I'm the Student Athlete Wellness Services Coordinator at the University of Washington. Um, and so today I'm going to draw on my experience in education with resilience, motivation, and sports psychology. So we'll kind of jump right in. Let me see. Oh, let's see. Okay, there we go. So here's where we're headed today. I hope that this map becomes something that you all feel really confident in. For those of you who are doing the Seattle Marathon, I believe, based on my Google search, that this is the map for the 2025 Seattle Marathon. If it's not, I apologize. I haven't vetted this with any planners or anything like that. But I'm going to overview today just kind of the fundamentals of resilience. I'm going to use the resilience framework that I developed in my doctoral work and that anchors both the athletic department, mental health programming, and EDUC 215, which is an undergraduate introduction to resilience class. That was the class that I created for really to collect my dissertation data, but it's lived on for now over a decade, and is something that undergraduates can take for credit, and it's something I'm proud of and never thought would be the case. But we'll review that framework. I'll invite you all to do a values exercise. Sebastian sent along a link that hopefully everyone was able to access that will kind of accompany my overview, and we'll do a little values exercise around that. And then I'll briefly go over a couple elements or constructs related to motivation and mindset, and then kind of understand the way that our thoughts play with us and how they kind of work. And so all of that will culminate in some strategies to really optimize your ability to engage in training. And if you're struggling while you're competing, hopefully some strategies that can help you kind of recenter. So I'll kind of kick it off. I'll kind of get going here. So let me see. All right. So the first thing that's really important is to just be really clear about how we're thinking about resilience. And so resilience as a concept is an experience. There's no resilience finish line. You don't kind of cross a threshold and then you just have resilience. It's always tied to stressors. And so when you've overcome any stressor that you're facing, you now experience resilience. And that's the case until the next stressor comes. And so when I think about kind of the different models of resilience, and there are several, one of the models of resilience is called the challenge model of resilience. And that model kind of specifies that when we encounter moderate but manageable stressors, that we grow our capacity to experience resilience. And so what my doctoral work was on during the literature review phase was understanding, okay, so what are all the pieces that contribute to our experience of resilience? And what that led to is this framework here. So this framework is called the APT resilience framework. APT by definition means suited to the purpose, quick to learn, ready, willing. All of those are resilience constructs. As an acronym, ADAPT, persevere, thrive. And so one of the things I talk to the student athletes about whenever I address them as teams and I overview what our mental health supports look like for them, is I introduce this framework and I let them know, if you're in a particular moment of difficulty and you're having a hard time figuring out what to do, what can you change? How can you adapt what the situation is or what your behavior is or what your thinking is so that you can persevere and ultimately thrive. I also invite them to think about if you've been in a rut for like a couple weeks at a time. What is a change that you can make in your life that's going to promote a different outcome so you can get out of that rut, ultimately persevere, and then again thrive? So, as an acronym, it serves a purpose: adapt, persevere, thrive. And then the word itself has relevance to resilience. So, when we're thinking about what are the 9 components, this is where your handout's going to be really effective or beneficial, rather. So, the first 3 elements, I refer to them as the cores. And that's a combination of your values and your goals. That's your sense of purpose. If you ever have goals that are not tied to your values, it's possible that you're working toward things that aren't meaningful to you. And when you get there, you can't get that time back. Yes, you can reflect on what you learned along the way, but a much healthier and more kind of optimal way to engage or identify what your goals are is to have those goals tied to values. And your values are things that basically the difference between values and goals, values inform how you show up, how you live your life. You can never achieve your values. You can only live in line with your values. And so if your goals are informed by your values, then every time you reach your goal, it's affirming that you're living a values-filled life, a fulfilling life. And more importantly, when you have goals that are tied to your values, inherently, your goals are going to be something that is out of reach that you have to work toward. It's going to get hard. And so having a clear idea of what your values are so that you can turn to those to help compel you to persevere, that's one of the most important kind of combinations that support your resilience. I'm sure many of us can think of individuals who have a lot of difficult circumstances in their life, but they have a very clear sense of purpose. And through that, they're able to kind of persevere and experience resilience when they get through whatever the difficulty is. So that's one of the core elements, your sense of purpose, and specifically looking at your values. The next is your healthy attachments and connections to support of others. Who do you have in your life that supports you in a healthy way? And I'm not talking about like your friends and your homies who actually are people who you like to spend time with, but maybe they're not really good for you and they kind of detract you from moving in the direction of your sense of purpose. I'm talking about people who serve as healthy attachments and connections and who help promote your growth and direction towards something positive, ideally a sense of purpose that you have or hold. And then your experience of positive emotions. Experiencing positive emotions has multiple benefits, but in terms of, and this is, I guess I'll spoil it right here. One of the things about positive emotions that's so essential for us is that our negative thoughts have they have a way of spiraling. That's kind of how they operate, and they can lead us down a little bit of a rabbit hole. And so when you have access to positive emotions, the research around that talks about positive emotions have an undoing effect to negative thoughts and negative emotions. And so if you can interrupt whatever negative thoughts and emotions that you're experiencing with positive emotions, that's helpful to help reorient you and get you back on track for things that you're aspiring to. The next elements are your reasoning. So kind of what's between your ears, and that's basically being optimistic, positive, and that's characterized by a number of things. So active problem solving, having a growth mindset, which I'll talk a little bit about, having a positive stress mindset, which I'll talk a little bit about, and then specifically having this way of defining success that is more in line with what's called a task goal orientation. And I'll talk a little bit about that when I get to those pieces. Your resources are the internal and external things that support your experience of resilience. Examples of internal resources include your sense of humor, your intellect, your social ability. Those are just some of the pieces of internal resources. External resources are things like banks, schools, coaches, things like you're attending right now, I would consider an external resource. And these are all things that contribute to our experience of resilience. And then finally, what are the routines that you engage in on a regular basis that support your experience of resilience? So I'm talking about, are you socializing in a healthy way? Are you practicing gratitude? Do you have healthy sleep hygiene so you're getting lots of rest? There's another thing that's attached to the handout. It's called the refreshers. That's a host of practices that you can engage in that support your mental health. They promote mental health and they are non-pharmaceutical. So relationships, exercise, fun, recreational activities, relaxation and stress management, um, earth, time in nature, sufficient sleep, helping others, and then eating well, and then your reason. I flipped those two E's. But those are a host of things that you can do that supports your mental health and wellness, and they have nothing to do with medicine. So those are all research ways that you can engage in practices, and if you make them a part of your routines, you are promoting your capacity to experience resilience. And then finally, your awareness of self, others, and the environment. Ultimately, this is just your ability to detect kind of your thoughts, emotions, and your behaviors in the context of your environment and others. And then for others, it's your ability to see that in other people, and then your environment, and just being aware of your environment and whether or not your environment is actually aligned with some of the short and long-term goals that you have for yourself. So collectively, this serves as a bit of a roadmap to kind of see where you're at in your capacity to experience resilience. The more established you have these things, the higher your capacity to experience resilience. That was really dense, and I apologize. And I think it's important for all of us to have just a little bit of awareness about what are the things that help us experience resilience. And so this is what it boils down to. The link or the work, the handout that I sent along has definitions for all of these, which also are very dense, but I'm on campus. You're welcome to reach out to me, and I'm happy to kind of elucidate these things if that's something that you're interested in. So what I'd like for you all to do now is I want you to take a minute. When we think about sense of purpose, it's meaning in life that extends beyond momentary pleasures and informed by one's values and goals, okay? What is a value that informs why you're here today? Why are you running? Does it have to do with your health? Does it have to do with just setting a goal and knowing that you can do something, and so it has more to do with growth and achievement? What is the value that compels you to do this? Because having clarity on that is going to really be valuable for this whole journey of both training and competing. So I invite everybody to just literally take about a minute, and I'll put a little timer on my watch. Take a minute and write down a value or two that informs why you're here today and why you're pursuing this endeavor of running. Again, your values cannot be achieved. Your values are something you live in line with. So for me in this job, service to others is a value. I have this job, so I don't stop being of service to others. This job tells me I'm living in line with my values. So what is that when it comes to running? So everybody just take a minute, and I'm going to turn off my camera just so that we can all just have some time to reflect. Okay. In the interest of potentially fielding some questions, I just want to keep moving. Hopefully that wasn't too difficult. And hopefully this is something that makes sense to be able to come back to at a later time. So the next portion I want to talk about is just the different mindsets and motivations that can really make a difference in how you engage in this whole process. So I'm hoping that everybody is familiar with this idea of a growth mindset. This idea that our ability and our intelligence are things that can be developed and cultivated through effort. One of the most important pieces about that, and the next two pieces I'm going to speak into, is just the fact that it embeds you in a process. And so rather than having whatever's happening be your final anything ever, therefore increasing tons of the pressure that you face, staying connected to growth and effort allows us to be embedded in more of a process and be present in the moment and not get too ahead of ourselves. And that's important for a number of reasons, because that's where those sources of anxiety and dread come from. When we kind of worry about the future versus when we're very present, we can manage this moment and our thoughts can be oriented to where we want them to be. This is one of the benefits of mindfulness practices. You just cultivate the ability to be present or notice when you get distracted. Let those distractions or those thoughts go and come back to the present and choose where you want your attention to go. The other mindset that I really wanted to highlight is the idea of a positive stress mindset. So often we're presented with stress as fight, flight, or freeze, or fawn sometimes. And it's often tied to this harmful and negative thing, rather than a more comprehensive view of what stress is. And it's just our body's natural way of preparing us for a challenge. And so this positive stress mindset, our perception that stress has an enhancing quality, not just a negative and detrimental one, is hugely important, because often when we come into contact with stress and we get nervous about a competition, or we become aware of like how we're doing, and it kind of gives us a shot of nerves, and then we start to tighten and we get in our own way, and our thoughts race and they go negative. Those same physiological responses, that boost in heartbeat, that fast thinking, those things can be viewed as enhancing if you think of it that way. So if you interpret your stress response as preparing you for a challenge, your body will respond accordingly. Namely, your blood vessels, rather than constrict because they're thinking fight or flight, they stay dilated. And so all of that extra energy gets distributed in a healthy way. Those thoughts that are racing, they don't just kind of get scattered, they become extra creativity and things that help you problem solve more readily, all just by how you interpret your stress response. So thinking about what is happening, just noticing what's happening and interpreting that as a positive is beneficial for A, your wellness, and B, your performance. On top of that, one of the ways to cultivate a positive stress mindset is to remember, we don't feel stress unless we care about something. If you don't care about something, you're not going to feel any kind of stress around it. And so if you feel stress, that means that there's something important. That means that there's a value that's present in whatever you're doing. Taking the time to identify what value is present for you. What's meaningful right now that my body's going, you know what? You're ready for this. We're prepared for this. That's why you have all this extra energy. Identifying what that is helps you experience a positive stress mindset and helps you experience an enhancing physiological response to whatever your stressor is. And then last, task goal orientation. And so one of the things I've done when I was working as a therapist is I just had all these kind of acronyms running around in my head. And this idea of a task goal orientation. So your goal orientation is basically how you define success is pretty much how I explain it. And when you define success as effort and self-improvement, then success is easy, EASI. Again, really embedding you in a process. And so one of the benefits of a task goal orientation is it's one of the best ways to kind of boost your motivation. And it's also one of the best ways to minimize how kind of we can, it's very aligned to that fixed mindset. Some of the research that one of the early authors of goal orientation did was contemporary with Carol Dweck. Um, and so there's a lot of similarities and crossover. But ultimately, when you define success by effort and self-improvement, thereby embedding yourself in a process, and I think about this in both the training standpoint and the pressure we put on ourselves, and also even in the competing standpoint, if you zoom out and remember that you're just in the midst of a process and you stay connected to growth and improvement, you take the pressure on the outcome and you just allow yourself to be motivated to grow and push. So those are three kind of uh, constructs of mindset and motivation that I hope are really beneficial to your training, preparation, and then your performance. So this is the last piece, not the very last piece, but one of the pieces I wanted to touch on is just how our negative thoughts work. And I already talked about it a little bit. It spirals. And so having some strategies to interrupt that spiraling is really valuable. One of those ways is positive emotions. So identifying things that are going to be kind of go-to staples for you to turn to that evoke positive emotions could be a really effective strategy for you to stay in a positive space. Um, I don't know what that is for each of us. I can think of special occasions with my family or special experiences that I've had along the way in my life that will always evoke a positive emotion. Personally, one of the ones that I can always turn to, gets me choked up sometimes even thinking about it, very similar to this year with the Mariners, 1995. I was there at the Kingdom when Edgar Martinez hit the double. Griffey scores from first. Epic, epic, epic Mariner moment. Me and my dad were there. I will always have that. If I'm ever in a place where it's just a negative emotion, that could be something I would turn to, and it would just interrupt that spiraling. So identifying things that are going to help interrupt that are really, really useful. If you have a go-to staple, that is one way that you can achieve that. I talked about mindfulness as one of the strategies or just something that's useful. Ways to tap into mindfulness practices can include engaging any of our senses. One of the things that I've done when I've gone for longer runs and I've just fatigued a little bit and my mind is just a little bit drifting is I've tapped my fingers because it's a very concrete thing that I can turn my attention to and it interrupts that kind of thinking that is questioning. So that is kind of one of the things I wanted to bring your attention to is just the way that our negative thoughts work. And so when I was preparing for this, one of the things I thought would be really interesting to go along with my education and experience around motivation, mindset, resilience, would be to talk specifically to a distance runner. And I asked what was strategies that were used when things were difficult. And a couple of those I thought were really helpful. And this is where I want to get to the place where you all kind of need some practical strategies, perhaps. And so I hope these can be beneficial. So, one of the things that we talked about was when things are difficult and there's noticing that there's extra thinking going on, or even just questioning, one strategy is to turn to technique. So, how is your form? What's your technical kind of activity looking like? How's your pace? One of the things that was mentioned specifically also was how's my breathing? That's something we automatically do when I lead a mindfulness session. The first place we start is breathing because if you're alive, you're breathing. And so if you can notice your breathing, not try to change it necessarily, but just bring your attention to it, you've now completely interrupted where your thinking is going. And in this case, this runner talked about their breathing being deep enough, slow enough. So if you've attended to that as you've done your training, how is that showing up for you? Um, and then finally, in our conversation, one of the things that was mentioned was that ultimately it's a choice. It's a choice to do something really difficult that your body finds really difficult. And so when we talked about that, I really found that to be a beautiful kind of moment. Going back to what I said about sport is such a natural thing to build our resilience. Sport is full of moderate yet manageable stressors. When you're going for long runs and your mind is starting to play some tricks on you and starting to question, those are moments that are manageable. Those are moments where there's an inherent choice. And in that moment, that's an opportunity for you to think about your technique, think about your breathing, identify why are you running? What is a value that got you to there? And allow that to compel you forward. What is something positive that you can turn to? Can you look at this as an opportunity? When you're going for these long runs, there's going to be choices that show up over and over. And I invite you not to entertain those and which direction that you go with it. Think about all those pieces I just talked about, your technique, your breathing, some other kind of present, any of your senses that are present that helps you get mindful. But also allow those to compel you forward. Allow those values to compel you forward. So the anecdote that I shared with Sebastian that I'll never forget, I've had many lives, and one of those lives was as a bartender. And that was something I did before I started my graduate work, and then throughout that time, throughout graduate work. And there was somebody who he was a regular, and he was a heavy beer drinker, and just a bigger fellow, just in stature, and tall, and just, you know, just a bigger human being. And he told me a night that he was in having multiple beers that tomorrow he's going to run a marathon. And I was like in disbelief. And I asked him how he could bring himself to do that. And he said, I've done it multiple times. And it was a fundraiser for cancer. And what he did was he would write down somebody's name who had cancer, and he would run for them. And so he would just, every mile, he would repeat somebody's name over and over, over and over. And he said, you know, do you have anybody? And I shared a name that somebody who I grew up with. And I saw him the day after his run, and he had completed it, and he looked otherwise entirely fine. And I hadn't had any of the education that I'm bringing to you all right now, but I reflect back on that, and it just, in my estimation, shows such the power of where your mindset is and what you would turn your attention to, and how that allows you to be compelled to persist and persevere and reach the things that you aspire to. So I hope those constructs and those elements of resilience and those strategies resonate and can be of value to you all. I wish you the best of luck. Enjoy the ride, enjoy your runs. Thank you for your time.